Hi and welcome to the Layer2 Cloud Connector for SharePoint demo video. My name is Lars Filinski from Layer2. Layer2 is one of the leading providers of Microsoft SharePoint apps in Europe, with a major focus on data integration and collaborative knowledge management, social networking and cloud computing. Layer2 is also well known for consulting services in the fields of SharePoint, .NET programming and IT infrastructure for more than 20 years. Today, I will show you how easy it is to connect a native SharePoint 2010 or 2013 list to an external data source with all list features available. We are going to use the Layer2 Cloud Connector for SharePoint where no further installation is required on the SharePoint side. In the first step, we will take a look at our external data source sample, in this case the table customers within the Northwind SQL Server demo database. Please note that the SQL Server is just a sample and that it is possible to connect to almost any external data source, for example SQL databases, ODBC, OLEDB, OData, XML, File System or any other data source. In this demo, we're going to connect this sample SQL table with the native SharePoint list in the Microsoft Office 365 Cloud. You're able to connect to any SharePoint 2010 or 2013 server. Doesn't matter if you are using SharePoint on-premise or externally hosted, it even includes sandbox configurations like SharePoint Online because there's no installation required on the SharePoint side. In the next step, I will create a list that will finally contain the external data. Just think of it like some kind of external data cache in SharePoint. Please note that you can sync libraries as well. In this demo, we will use the SharePoint Online as a part of Office 365. To create the list, just click on the list and then on the Create button. In this case, I will create a contact list because it already contains all required fields and it can be used later on for the offline synchronization via Microsoft Outlook. But you can of course choose any list type that will work for your data source. The name of the list in this case will be customers. To create the list, I simply click on the Create button and the list is created. To connect the external data to the created contact list, I will use the Layer2 Cloud Connector. The Cloud Connector can be installed on any PC or server within a local corporate network, for example, somewhere near the data source. It consists of several components to create, manage, and run connections in the background as a Windows service. To run the connection manager, I simply click on the Windows Start menu. The connector, as a typical Windows Management Console application, comes with a tree view of your current connections on the left-hand side, a property sheet in the middle, and a menu of context-specific actions on the right side. To create a connection, I can right-click in the connection tree and select Create New Connection or copy an existing sample connection if it fits the requirements. In this case, we will start with the sample SQL to Cloud connection because this is exactly what we want to do. We make a copy of the existing connection and rename it to Customers to O365. In this case, we want to use a bidirectional connection. We want to use the native SharePoint contact list in the cloud as a simple database front end to modify records in the remote SQL database. After choosing the direction of the connection, we have to modify the pre-filled properties of both data entities to fit the specific requirements. I rename the data entity to Customers. In my demonstration here, I choose the SQL Client Data Provider. In case of other data source types, you have to select an appropriate provider. You can choose any provider installed on your system, for example ODBC, OLEDB, OData or any other .NET-based provider. If you are missing a provider in the list, for example to connect to MySQL, please install and configure the missing drivers first. Please note that you can use 64-bit as well as 32-bit providers with both versions of the Connection Manager. You can also choose any of the Layer 2 data providers that are included in the product package. The Layer 2 data provider for SharePoint, CSOM, allows you to synchronize with external SharePoint lists on-premise or in the Microsoft Cloud and supports the write-back function from SharePoint to SharePoint. The Layer 2 data provider for OData can be used to connect with read-write access to a lot of systems that support the OData protocol. For example, Microsoft ERP and CRM solutions. By using the Layer 2 data provider for RSS, you can synchronize all kinds of RSS news feeds, for example for Facebook or Twitter. The Layer 2 data provider for XML is used to integrate XML data files or web requests in SharePoint. In the next step, you have to add a connection string to your data entity properties in the field below. Connection strings are not specific for the Cloud Connector. Almost any data source can be connected using a connection string. The connection string of a certain data source type can be found within the vendor documentation or simply over the internet. In this case, I built a connection to the SQL Server with the sample database Northwind. After entering it, I have to verify the connection. You can disable access to this security relevant information using encryption if required. Or you can use integrated security to pass the current user's credentials if that's supported by the provider. In the next step, you have to enter a select statement to query the data source table. In this case, I want to have all data of the customer's table. After entering it, I click again on the verification link. I can also choose to show a preview of my data simply by clicking on the preview action menu on the right hand side. The data source field customer ID in the top left corner of my preview is obviously used as a primary key. I will add this primary key to the field primary keys within the Cloud Connector settings to safely update the items later on and validate it. In the next step, I have to connect to my SharePoint list. To connect to SharePoint lists or libraries, you have to select the Layer 2 data provider for SharePoint that is included within the product package. As a connection string, you can use the full URL of the list view, which can simply be taken and entered with a copy and paste from the browser. Several authentication methods are supported. We are going to use Office 365 and the user ID and password as we have entered it in the web browser, if logged in manually. Take a look at the product manual for other authentication methods like Windows Integrated, using cookies or ADFS. In the next step, we verify the connection string. If you receive any errors here, please check the URL and authentication again. There is no need to enter a primary key here, because the driver will automatically use the SharePoint item ID for that. There are additional options available, for example, the Disable Delete option that can be used with data aggregation scenarios. We don't want to use those additional options in this demo. Therefore, I will continue by simply saving the data entity connection strings. As a next step, we have to provide the mapping of the data source fields to the SharePoint list columns. We are not able to use the auto mapping feature because of different data source field names in our sample compared to the data destination list column names. Therefore, we have to set up the field mapping manually. If you are missing some fields on the SharePoint side, you can create it at any time and add to the mapping later on. It is also possible to modify the column types to fit your data source in a better way. Finally, please verify the mapping and save it. Now I'm ready for the first synchronization. To do that, I will switch to the connection page and click Run. As expected, the items are inserted. After the first few syncs are now successfully finished, I will go to my SharePoint list to take a look at it. We can now see that the items were added to my SharePoint list. The free shareware version we're using right now is limited to 25 items. If you want to sync more items, please request a full-featured time-limited license or order the product. Users can now work with this native SharePoint list as they are used to. They can, for example, create views, use the search, subscribe to RSS or change alerts, use it in lookups, export it to Excel, or use it offline in Outlook. They can set up workflows or add SharePoint-only columns for attachments or additional social content. To make it short, they can do whatever they usually do with the native SharePoint list. Please note that we have configured a bidirectional connection in this sample. That means changes made in the SharePoint lists are synced back to the data source with the next run. To show you that changes made in the SharePoint are synced back to the data source with the next run, I will modify some data and run the connection again. The data entities can be synchronized as an automated job in the background using the Windows servers that is part of the application. To use the automated background job, I have to enable the scheduling and set an interval and a first run, for example, every hour. The background service must be up and running for this. The Cloud Connector closes many gaps that still exist with SharePoint out-of-the-box data integration, especially in case of externally hosted or cloud-based SharePoint installations. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit www.layer2.de.